Welcome everyone officially to the Supporting Math Learning through Competency Standards and Assessments for grades 9 through 12. We're excited to have you here. These are your presenters for today. So we have Annie Wallace. She is your New Hampshire Department of Ed math specialist.
Hi, thank you for coming, everybody. We appreciate it.
We also have Heather Jenkins from Demonstrated Success. She is our Director of Assessment Math Curriculum at the company.
Hi, everybody.
And my name is Tammy Hilton. I am your facilitator for today, and I also work for Demonstrated Success. So we want to thank the New Hampshire Department of Education for sponsoring this webinar. This is the last in a series of webinars to support math learning. Because this is a webinar, everyone is going to be muted, but please feel free to ask questions. We'd love to have you put them in the Q&A section on your Zoom screen, and I will be checking those throughout the presentation and responding back to them, or having Heather and Annie jump in. If you have information that you'd like everyone to see, please enter it in the chat section. And tomorrow you will receive an email with a link to your PD certificate, a video recording of this webinar, the PowerPoint Heather and Annie are going to show you, and any other documents and resources that they've linked within this presentation as well. And so with that, I'm going to hand it off to Heather, who's going to start us off. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm Heather Jenkins. This is just my gentle reminder for the day. I know that right now teaching is not the easiest job to have, but just know that everybody needs us. We need great teachers, and we appreciate you all being here today. I also want to just I just saw the chat, and we were saying that this is the last in a series of webinars. There are other recordings. These particular webinars have gone in grade level spans. So there is a K-2 webinar that is the same format. Then there's a 3 through 5, a 6 through 8, and then we're finishing up today with the high school 9 through 12. I am going to turn off my camera just to make it a little bit easier for me to be able to focus just on the screen, and we'll get started. Our agenda today, we're going to start off with talking about standards, competencies, and assessments. Then we're going to go into what it means to align those standards with competencies, and then assessing the competencies with performance tasks, and then a wrap up for question and answer. So the first part of this, as you all well know, I know we're working with high school folks here, and the biggest thing that we're making sure to always be looking at whenever we're thinking about competencies is the Common Core. So just to make sure we're all on the same page with how we read the Common Core standards, as you print out the Common Core standards, they have a just general way that they are set up. So there are specific what are called math domains, or even ELA domains, or social studies, or things like that. We call them reporting categories as well. And so those are set up. And so we have like the real number system and quantities and all of that. So those are all of your domains of math that would be listed in the standards. And then underneath those are different clusters of standards. So underneath the real number system, you have extend the properties of exponents and rational exponents, or use properties of rational or irrational numbers. So those are what we call clusters of standards. A lot of times when we align curriculum or when we create competencies, we use clusters of standards to be able to cover in those competencies. And then underneath the clusters, we use and have the individual standards. So you want to make sure that we're covering all of those standards underneath a cluster. When it comes to understanding your standards, basically K through 12 for math standards, they are all built off of that same sort of understanding and making sure that they are focused, that they're coherent, they're internationally benchmarked, they're 100% research-based, and there's learning progressions for each grade level. They are not sort of just compartmentalized into each grade level, they're a whole progression. They have rigor to them. They are really defined not just by what we are teaching, but really what students should understand and to be able to do in mathematics. And they're also building on conceptual knowledge and understanding of specific skills. And there's two sets of standards that we look at. There's the standards of mathematical practice and then the grade level content standards. We tend to really be looking a lot at those grade level content standards, but don't forget about those mathematical practice standards, which are those problem solving skills and everything that students need to be able to be great mathematicians. In addition, when it comes to knowing our content standards, we want to make sure that you understand just the key math concepts for K-8, so you know where they came from, and then what your key math concepts are for the high school strands. You, I'm sure, teach specific math sections or specific math content areas, and you have your specific courses that you're teaching. But this is all of the particular key math concepts for high school listed here. We've also connected you here to specific sites. So tomorrow, when you get access to this particular folder, in the folder here, you'll have access to this slide deck. And so you can use any of the links that are in here as well. When it comes to knowing your standards as well, there are coherence maps and progressions. So they're linking topics across kindergarten through high school so that you're able to see, again, where are the students coming from and where are they going to in your particular areas of expertise. So you can see here, this is properties of geometric figures, and this is saying where that pretty much is starting is in 5th grade and how it goes and the progression of it through each grade so that you know where they are coming from so that you can get them to where they need to be for high school. But it is something that we talk a lot about with grade levels as well, even before high school, in that the math standards go through multiple years of being refined. So maybe it's, started in one particular grade level and it's really introduced there. And then they're working on it in another grade level and really securing those skills in the next grade level. And perhaps the grade level after that, they're taking that skill and breaking it off and going in another direction with that skill as well. So definitely looking at the progressions is really important for you to be understanding and knowing your standards as well. So Achieve the Core is a website that you may or may not be familiar with, but they have the this particular document here is the applicable prerequisites for post-secondary options. So these are the prerequisites for high school, the things that students need to know as they're getting into high school, and the materials and the domains and clusters that need to be understood when getting up into your particular grade levels. In addition, on the Achieve the Core website, they have Coherence Maps. So these are screenshots of Achieve the Core, but the great thing about this Coherence Map is that you're able to choose any area of math that you would like. You click on that particular area and it brings up the different sets of standards that they have for that particular area of math. And then as you drill down from those, you can choose a specific, the real number system we're looking at here, and it's telling you the standards that are the prerequisite standards and the standards that are needed for that particular area. And then as you click on the specific standard, you can then map that standard. And there's a little on the right-hand side, you can see that particular standard. You can see some examples of that standard. You can download some example tasks. You can see the progressions. You can see the focus area. And really, an important piece of this are these areas here, which it's a little bit hard to read. We just wanted to give you an idea of what you're going to see, is these are all the prerequisite skills to be able to get to this. And this skill is here, and this is where it's going with that particular skill. So a lot of times, as you're looking at specific standards for your course content, it's really beneficial to be able to see maybe what some of those prerequisites are. So if kids aren't quite there yet or not quite getting it, you see where they're coming from. And then when they are, this is where we're needing to go with that particular skill. So again, this is where I was saying that you're able to see some of the additional information, task information, or focus areas or examples for that particular area.
So why standards, competencies, and rubrics? So in the old traditional practice was basically teacher-centered. So the teacher selected the topic from the curriculum. They designed the instructional activities, then they gave an assessment on what they had done, and basically the student got the grade and they moved on to a new topic. Now, using our standards, we want to build a student-centered practice where we pick what standards we want the students to know. We design an assessment that will let us know that they've reach the skills and understandings built into those standards. And we use competencies with rubrics to help determine their learning and the quality of their learning. And then we decide the lessons and the opportunities to bring the students up to that endpoint. And we use the data to give them feedback and opportunities to learn what they may not have solidified prior to their competency task or assessment. So competencies are basically the end product. Where is it we want our student to get to? And my own children loved watching the cooking shows, and that's basically what it was. You learned all the different parts that you needed to do, and then you were assessed on your final outcome, and they used a rubric to assess you. So in the frosting, what needed to have been done, and the decorations, what needed to be done, and at what quality level. So what are academic competencies? They're basically broadly stated goals and success skills that are measurable, rigorous, and transferable. So they empower student learning beyond the single lesson, unit, or course. We want them to be able to take their learnings and apply them as they move forward in their life. They allow students to demonstrate the ability to apply and transfer their learning, and they help facilitate the student-centered learning as well as being interwoven within the curriculum learning progressions and learning outcomes. So academic competencies incorporate a set of skills with knowledge and dispositions. And for mathematics, basically the dispositions are what we consider as our standards of mathematical practice. And a person develops competencies over time through practice and experience. It doesn't happen overnight. So standards describe what students should know and be able to do in relation to the established criteria. They're distinct statements that provide the building blocks or the frameworks for the competencies. And we tend to use checklists. And for competencies, that describes how students apply and transfer their learnings to new contexts and situations. And they encompass multiple standards and are assessed at multiple times, and they allow for the transfer of knowledge and skills across content areas. And for those, we tend to use rubrics. So a checklist versus a rubric. Checklists just give us a set of criteria, skills, understanding, or tasks to be accomplished. They're not assessing the acquired knowledge, but is the student being able to do this or not? So it's a yes or no. Whereas rubrics provide detailed explanations of the quality. So what constitutes excellence, and what are we looking at when we assess the acquired knowledge and skills? And they're used to explain exactly what one needs to achieve in content and performance to be proficient. Both checklists and rubrics are useful tools that can guide students in their learnings and also guide us as teachers and educators and where our students are at and what misunderstandings they may have and where they're excelling. So here's, oops, sorry.
So here is a checklist example. This particular example, though, is one of the competencies that Annie has created and is up on that DOE website. So if you click on this link here, you can see all of the competencies that she has created as a guide for you to be able to help you in your instruction and your teaching.
All right, Heather, can I just jump in? And we know high schools have been working on competencies for a long time, and with high school being very different than the K-8, where everything is pretty much grade specific, here it's course specific. So the Appendix A in the Common Core Math was used. So your competencies may be different in the skills and understandings you have aligned with your competencies may be slightly different based on what you and your school and district have already put together and how your courses are constructed.
Right. I also do want to say as well, I do see that somebody has raised their hand. Because we're in a webinar format, it's hard for us to really have folks raise their hand and be able to ask questions. If at all possible, if you could put your question in the Q&A, then Tammy will feed that question to us, or Annie or I will look at that particular question that you have and go from there. So that little Q&A portion will be a little bit more helpful for us to be able to get the questions that you have, if that's possible for you to write it in there. So again, going to the slide here, this is a specific competency that was created, but it's also an example of a checklist. So the checklist that we have here is a specific set of skills that we know needs to be looked at, and those skills need to be secured before we actually have the students do that competency. So we can start to see what do students have, what do we still need to work on, and then we actually are going to assess them on that particular competency. It allows a teacher to see where a student is, if a student is ready, if the class has met that particular, those particular skills, and then we know whether we can do a performance task or any other sort of summative assessment of that competency once those particular skills are completed. Another example of a checklist is a class observation checklist. I think, this particular example here is a little bit more of an elementary example, but we kept it in here because it is able to be used for really any grade level. And it's really just looking at your students, looking at a specific mathematical practice or skill that you're trying to just get a quick read on. And then you're saying whether they're not there yet, whether they're on target, or they're above and beyond. It's also great to have comments there so that you can just get a little general idea of where students are. I know in high school, everything is really focused on how are they performing on a specific assessment or a specific assignment. But this is also a really good way to make sure that you know where your students are and where you need to go with that. And again, dating, you want to put a date on it, right? We want dates on our entries so that we know exactly when we were looking at this particular information. Another example of a task of a rubric or a checklist is a task-specific rubric. This one here, I really like because it's a 4-point rubric. We've got a couple of them, like a 1 or a 2, where they either have a little accomplishment in a specific area or a partial accomplishment. And then you've got 2 as well that are, levels 3 or 4 that are substantial accomplishment or full accomplishment. So what this is letting us do is seeing who's not there yet and who's got it. The big takeaway from a type of rubric like this as well is that a 3 on this rubric is where we want students to strive to be, right? We want them to have substantial accomplishment or be proficient in a skill. However, we also have a 4. So that is really sort of almost going above and beyond with that skill. So students know where they can go, even if they are already proficient in a skill.
Heather, there is a question in the chat.
Yeah.
It says, where may we find specifics and examples of a competency? For example, where may I find the details of the mathematics, data patterns and relationships competency, or any competency, and what types of problems incorporate that?
So this is where we were talking about the link that I have. I'm just gonna go back here. This link goes right to the Department of Education website. This is what we were just talking about with Annie has created competencies that they can use as a guide. And it's not just this particular competency that she has. All of them are listed there, all the way from basically kindergarten up through high school. They are all in Excel form for everybody to be able to use and to access. So this is the link to that particular page.
And then seeing this, the standard, like Achieve the Core, has links to a lot of tasks and assessments to those standards. So if you know what standards are falling within a competency, that's a good place to start. And then we have other examples of places you can go for tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right, so as we move on from here, we're gonna just be looking at, here's another example of a rubric. This is specifically from Engage New York. It's for Algebra 1. And obviously we know in high school, rubrics are kind of the way that a lot of things are assessed. Although sometimes with math, I think that people, it's a little bit harder to figure out rubrics. So rubrics are essential in making sure that students understand what their learning goals are and what the expectations are for them as learners. So we want to make sure that we're really clear on what the assessment form is and what they need to be doing to meet that particular criteria. They obviously help us identify what quality work is. And the biggest thing that a good rubric will do is help teachers assess assignments consistently. A good rubric will be less subjective, right? It is, this is what students need to be showing me to be able to show me that they have those particular skills. And it also helps teachers provide feedback and promote student learning. So once you have rubrics in place and as students see how they're scoring, they can see what they need to do to be able to move themselves to the next level. You know, gone sort of are the days of just putting a learning target up on the board and saying this is a purpose of this. Now we really need to make sure that students understand what that means for them And rubrics are a really good way of sort of helping students understand, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be able to do, and this is how I get there. And the last one that I have here is an observation rubric. It's similar to the observation checklist that you saw a little bit earlier, but this is a rubric. So we have above and beyond, on target, and not there yet. You put your specific skill in and what each what they're going to be needing to do to show that they're above and beyond, on target, or not there yet. And this is a little bit more generic than that exact task rubric, right? It can help you plan out lessons so you can see you've got a couple of kids who aren't there yet, a lot of kids on target, and some are above and beyond. So that helps you figure out where you need to go with your lessons. And it helps you figure out who you need to follow up with specific skills or specific areas of maybe reteaching or bridging some gaps for some of your students.
So assessments, we have two major categories of assessments, formative and summatives. And the assessments are what are allowing us and our students to monitor their progress towards learning and achieving the objectives. And they can be approached in a variety of ways. So we have our formative assessments that are basically given throughout the course, and a lot of it may just be observation and listening in on student conversations and taking a look at what they're doing. And that's telling us as we move along who needs a little bit more support, who may need an extension. And then we have our summative assessments, which are more likely to be our performance tasks or a good, strong problem set. And that's given at the end of the instructional period and provides evidence of where the students are on the progression of just beginning to learn something all the way to mastering the competency. And they also provide feedback to the students and for us, and they allow us to know what we may then need to scaffold in still as we continue on with the learning. So here's an example of a formative assessment. This is from a series of books by Cheryl Rose Toby and Carolyn Arlene, who are both from the New England area. And they provide examples to student work and what to look for as students complete these. And then we have our summative assessment type, which is the here's the example of the summative from Engage New York. Competency on statistics and probability, and they give problem sets, and the problems tend to be connected to each other, but they also look at very specific standards or set of standards within that area. And in their rubric, you can see they align exactly what they're looking for the student to accomplish to indicate where they are in their learning and the quality of their learning. So different types of assessments allow us to assess different things. And that's one of the important things that we all know as a teacher is not all assessments target the same thing. So this is just a chart to give us an idea of what types of assessment formats are good for assessing what type of knowledge or skills that we're looking for.
Mm-hmm. And before we have this, Annie, before we start this, I just want to talk a little bit about, I know Tammy was taking a peek at the Q&A and answering questions, and we're looking at, there was a question about what does a 3 out of 4 on a 4-point rubric mean for grading in a school? Like you can look at 3 out of 4 being a specific percentage, but it also depends on what the 3 on your rubric means. If a 3 on your rubric means that they are meeting proficiency, you would need to kind of figure out what does that mean for a specific grade. I will also say that traditionally schools that really start looking at competency-based grading tend to sometimes forego the letter grades, and they start doing competency-based report cards as well. So sometimes, like if you're in a mixture, you're just going to have to figure out, where do you really want students to be? If there are 3, what does that mean that they're showing you? And if it does mean proficiency, it may end up being an A as a 3, depending on what your rubric looks like, if that makes sense. Annie, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, because generally when you're looking at competencies and rubrics, you're looking at the quality versus the percent right or wrong. So the two systems don't necessarily gel very well together, but as we transition, we're finding that mix, and that's up to the schools and the school districts. And those are conversations to have with your administration and the powers that be in the school board and the community members, so that there's a consistent communication and people are understanding what the different things mean.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, there's a couple more questions. I just didn't want you to start the video.
Yeah. No, totally fine. Thank you.
Yeah. So another question that came in would be, what would a high school transcript look like for colleges? And then the other one, well, I'll let you into that one, and then we'll go to the second one.
I can't say I've actually seen a transcript, but I do know that colleges are accepting them, and that the high schools have come about. So that's something maybe your guidance counselors would be able to show you. But I do know it is working, and colleges are accepting competency-based transcripts.
Yeah, and I know that just in general, having my daughter right now be going through the college process, that depending on the university, they even take your regular grade transcripts and interpret them in different ways. So while you might have, my particular town used to have, an 8-point scale instead of a 10-point scale, and it was a 93 to a 97, or 92 to a 90 or 100 was an A, and then a 91 through an 83. It was crazy. So A's and B's were really looked at in a little bit different ways in this particular school district where my girls are, and then they changed to the 10-point scale. So it was a huge process for parents to understand, well, now you're taking what used to be an A and expanding that, or what, and changing all of that. And it really made a lot of people nervous about what that meant for colleges. And your college guidance counselors are in high school, your college counselors there are the ones that are really going to be the most knowledgeable about that, because I know that universities, when they intake these transcripts from students, they basically take them apart and interpret them in their own ways anyway. I mean, even AP classes at some universities right now are not being accepted, and that's a college board thing. So
Yeah.
I think that universities, because competencies are such a big push in a lot of places right now, that colleges are expanding their knowledge of what those are and accepting them into their systems as well.
Right, and somebody had written in the chat session about thinking for the ease of comparability of students being compared to other students, leaving the grades as the letter grades. And I think schools and colleges are working on that, so that there is, and I'm not sure it's necessarily meeting the comparability of just students and their grades. I just know, having my own students or my own children going through college, that there's so much that colleges look at, when they're admitting students, because they try and get a diverse student body, and who's planning, like at a university, how many students are applying to the School of Engineering versus the School of Business, to the fine arts. So there's so much that goes into it that that's something that would be good to talk to guidance counselors at the high school level as well as college admissions officers about what is it that they look at and what is it that they're looking for when they look at students who are applying.
Mhm. Great. And then there was a quick question. I know, Tammy, you're probably going to feed it to me about the registering under different email addresses. Whatever email address you listed, you'll get the link for tomorrow. So it shouldn't be a problem at all about which email you have used. Mhm. All right. So we're going to get right in. Go ahead here now. Sorry, Annie, for that segue. It was good though. Mhm. So this particular video that we're going to be showing here just has a little bit different take on what it is to teach with competencies. And so I'm just going to play it really quickly and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I'm going to call it right now. I think I found the single biggest productivity hack of 2021. It's this Google Chrome extension.
Not that, this.
How do we create rich, authentic tasks that give us evidence of student understanding and ability to apply their learning? I think that a modern education should prepare students not only to learn things, but to be able to apply or use their learning in meaningful ways. I want teaching to be like coaching and athletics. In athletics, the players know that there's a game, and that's what they're working to get better at. So just as the game provides a reason for practice and authentic performance as our goal, I hope that students see that school is directed toward authentic, worthy performances, and that teachers function as coaches to help kids get better so they can play the game. So I want students to understand the goals that we're working toward, and hopefully to see that those goals are worthwhile and are worth working to achieve. We should be teaching for understanding and transfer.
Okay. All right, so I want to just pause just there for a second and make sure that there aren't any questions that we have before we move on to the aligning standards with competencies.
I do not see any questions, Heather.
Okay, thanks so much. All right. So as we talk about aligning the standards with competencies, there are 10 principles of competency-based learning. So I just want to go through these really quickly. Basically, the first one is all of those expectations are clearly and consistently communicated to students. And I like the second part, which is and families, right? So I know in high school, it's sometimes difficult to get families involved. And sometimes it's difficult to get families to not be so involved, but really making it clear to students and families what those particular expectations are is always just best practice. Again, that student achievement is going to be evaluated against common learning standards and those performance expectations. And when we're looking at anything that we're creating for assessment, it has to be standards-based. We always have to go back to those standards and make sure we're looking at those standards and interpreting those standards, and that success is achieved by really showing knowledge of those specific specific skills and standards. A lot of times when we're working with competencies, we're looking at those formative assessments as well to measure that progress, and in really informing our instruction to be able to get kids to where they need to be. And those summative assessments are helping us evaluate that achievement and level of proficiency at a specific point in time. All of that academic performance and achievement would be monitored and reported separately from work habits and character traits. So like homework is not necessarily showing that achievement, but what they're doing in class or what that assessment or that performance is really what's being measured. And then those grades, or whatever we're going to call them, whether they be a 4-point scale or whether they be an academic grade, is really showing and communicating that progression of learning and achievement that students have. Number 8, this is a big one, is that making sure that students have multiple opportunities to improve their work if they're not meeting those expected standards, or to show their work in other ways as well. So that multiple opportunities becomes tricky, right? We're talking about, we have a limited amount of time. We have certain blocks where we have students, but really the whole point of having a competency is to be able to show your understanding. So you need to have more than one specific time frame to be able to do that. If you haven't yet met it, you need to be given another opportunity to do so. Again, this multiple ways. This is just looking at how can a student show their learning. It's not always being shown in the exact same way for every student. So allowing them different opportunities to be able to show their learning, and having that be a little bit more flexible than maybe a paper pencil task or a specific performance that they need to do. You know, if you have students that are looking to show their understanding with a PowerPoint, maybe allows other students to be able to do a video instead of a PowerPoint, or a live presentation or a poster or something like that. And then again, this, when we're working with competencies and we're really starting to move towards achievement of specific sets of skills, it allows students to kind of be really a part of the decision-making and understanding of what they are actually learning.
Heather, there is a question before you move on.
Okay.
Are the standards provided, or do they need to be created by the teachers or schools?
The Common Core standards are those are the standards we're talking about. Those are provided. That is what the state of New Hampshire has adopted as their standards that are to be used at every grade level and every level of education in the state. So we're specifically, when we talk about standards, we're talking about the Common Core. The standards are if you just type in Common Core standards, they're right on that particular website. But where it becomes a little bit different is where some schools have taken those particular standards, and because of their courses, they have created the competencies for a specific course. So that's where it might vary a little bit from what Annie has done for her. She has come up with some model competencies that you can use, but depending on what courses you have at your particular high school, they might need to be, changed a little bit or tweaked a little bit, but they're a really great sort of starting point if you have not done any competencies at all yet in your high school. Annie's going to talk to this slide in just a second, but this is an example of one of the competencies that she has put together for high school.
Right. So originally, the New Hampshire model competencies were so broad, and one competency was expected to be met in several courses and met differently in the courses. So this is just trying to simplify the matter some so that it's more course related. And in the elementary grades, through middle school, it's more grade related rather than being so broad. So this is just an example of a competency for single variable linear equations. Here are the standards and the skills and understandings that would be associated with it. And these were all based on the example courses that are in Appendix A of the Common Core things. And typically, single variable linear equations would be addressed in an Algebra 1 or an Integrated 1 course.
We have another question, ladies.
Mhm.
Is there a disconnect between the SAT, our state's accountability test for high school math, and the Common Core?
No, not really. If somebody wants to email me, I can send them the document that has the standards and where they're aligned within the SAT.
Sounds great, thank you.
You're welcome.
We'll have the email addresses right at the end as well, so
Yes.
you can take a peek.
So an important part of going to a standards-based system, really part of that is the depth of knowledge. And it's understanding the depth of knowledge is not just about greater difficulty, things just getting harder. It's more about the cognitive rigor and flexibility of thinking and seeing multiple possibilities and seeing things from multiple perspectives and approaches, so that you have the flexibility to work with multiple numbers of problems and tasks that come your way. So we have to think of it that tasks we learn as a beginner. So in learning how to ski, decoding words, using math formulas, they may seem very difficult to do at first, but the more we use them and internalize them, then they become easier. But that doesn't change the skill level of those. So we need those beginning DOK 1 levels, because those are building the skills that will then use and need to apply as the tasks become more difficult or complex. So similar to being on an athletic team or being a musician, you have to use those skills before you can enter and play in the game or play in a concert situation. Depth of knowledge is not a hierarchy like Bloom's taxonomy. So really, the tasks at the lower DOK levels are preparing students to gain the basic and foundational skills so they can move on and solve and explore more complex non-routine problems. So it's a tool that can help strategically scaffold learning so students can move from basic to deeper understandings. They can learn how to be flexible with numbers. And it's not the number of steps that determines how complex something is. It's the non-routine nature of how one step might lead to a series of decisions that you have to make as you move forward in the task. So here are some examples. This is from Robert Kaplinski's matrices. So we can see that B is the DOK 1, is just telling us, can we look at two equations and determine whether the lines are perpendicular or not in this system? And then we move on to C, which is getting a little more complex in the thinking. We have to use the digits to 9 to create two perpendicular lines. So we have to know what we applied in B, and then in order to create the system in C with the complex lines. And then A just adds the complexity of how close to the origin can we get. So it just adds that extra thing to think about, factor to think about as we complete the problem. And this is just an example of one of his matrices, and those will be in the folders that you get the link for tomorrow. So templates, so we have templates looking at tasks, is this a good template? Does it fit our needs? Is it meeting what our learning goals were for the students? And does it allow students to apply their learnings as they progress towards taking the assessment? And then there's aligning standards with competency. So it can help us in the planning. So we know what our end goal is. Now we want to start thinking about how we're going to bring the students up to that end goal. And then proficiency versus mastery. So one of the features of a competency-based system is ensuring students can apply their knowledge and skills to new contexts and be good problem solvers and independent learners. So on the 4-point scale, we have the emergent learner. You're just beginning to learn it. Developing, you're almost there. You're still working on the skills. And then you've achieved proficiency. You've shown that you are proficient. You have met the learning goals and competencies. And then you have mastery. So just like we have master musicians, master carpenters, and electricians, those are the ones that go up and beyond what is proficient. And part of it depends on interest. Part of it depends on what they're looking to do. So we want to make sure we get our students to being proficient and encourage those who want to go on and up and above to develop that mastery.
Okay, I'm just going to pause there for just a second and make sure that there aren't any questions before we talk about assessing competencies with performance tasks.
I do not see any at this time, Heather.
Okay, great. All right, so as we talk about the assessment portion of competencies, I just wanted this graphic here just really points out how much time is spent on that teaching and learning. So going through the curriculum, all of your instruction and all of those formative assessments are about 90% of your time. A lot of time sort of getting all of that knowledge there. And then that summative assessment, or that what we're going to talk about with performance tasks or any sort of proficiency-based grading, is just about 10% of it. So you're spending a lot of time with those skills and ensuring understanding. And, the performance tasks are not necessarily taking up a huge amount of that time there, where those students are showing whether they are proficient or not. Now, that doesn't mean, again, like I had said before too, you might do some teaching and learning, and then you might do that summative assessment, and then you might have to go back to some reteaching and some other learning and have that performance task continue to be worked on after that as well. So they're not mutually exclusive of one another. And so as we're going through this, and what we're talking about are what are performance tasks, right? So they are a type of summative assessment traditionally, and they're part of the competency-based assessment model. They can be called performance assessments or performance-based assessments as well. And they basically are a student demonstrating the application of skills or knowledge that they have, and they are traditionally to authentic or real world problems or tasks. They tend to involve the application, again, of skills, and they tend to be a little bit more complex problem. Again, not necessarily a certain number of steps or more, but they tend to have some sort of complexity to them rather than to have it be just a rote or a quick showing of understanding. Performance tasks, again, they can be embedded throughout a unit. They can be short, specific little assessments here and there, or they can take place at the end of a lesson or be taking place over time. Anytime you have a performance task, you tend to be able to, or need to be able to provide feedback to the learner, right? This is where those rubrics really become effective in showing the learner where they are and where they need to go. When we talk about characteristics of a good performance task, you see this word all over the place, the application of knowledge or skills, right? Again, it's not just that quick recall or that memorization of something, but they are applying what they know to something new, right? A lot of times these particular tasks are open-ended and may not yield a single correct answer, right? You might be having them choose between, Annie and I were talking about it the other day, choose between two different vehicles that you would want to use on a vacation. And, why would they want to choose a specific vehicle over the other? And they use some sort of mathematical thinking of how that particular vehicle would perform depending on which vacation they are going to be going on. We want to make sure that they're establishing, or that we're giving them really novel or authentic context for that performance. And in their, what they're showing you, they're providing evidence that they understand and can transfer those skills that they have learned. And we have sort of this verbiage in here that it could be a messy situation. It's not always this really easy cut and dry situation, but it can really be beneficial in helping them show that authentic and thoughtful application of skills into a new context rather than something that's a little bit more scripted or formulaic. Performance tasks tend to be multifaceted and involve multiple steps. Right? We need to be able to assess several different standards and outcomes in it. So it tends to incorporate a lot of different skills. And it can also not just be a math context, right? It can be more than one subject area. It can be 21st century skills and be cross-curricular as well. So again, just to kind of wrap up, these particular tasks can occur over time, right? It doesn't need to be done in one sitting. Sometimes they can be. They're 100% aligned with the Common Core standards. There is a tangible product or something that's observable by you to be able to do the grading. A lot of times we're also encouraging students to do self-evaluation and to revise their thinking as well. That's where those rubrics really come into play. They might also work with a peer to be able to figure out some sort of peer review. And then the way this works is almost that backwards design, right? Well, it is really the backwards design where you establish that particular criteria of what you want to be able to be measured and where you want students to be. And then you make sure that students understand what that is. So if you do have a rubric, you want them to see the rubric before actually doing the project. And then you allow them time to be able to work on that either independently or with others.
So here's an example of a performance task, and this is from Inside Mathematics. Inside Mathematics does provide multiple performance tasks to choose from, all aligned with the standards, and they go from grade 2 up through high school. And while they're not a 4-point rubric, they are a point-based rubric, and they do provide exemplars of student work for us. And another site is Illustrative Math, which also provides rubrics for us. And samples, and they also have some videos of things of teaching and stuff, so they're a good resource to go to. Here are some places to go to for different performance tasks and take a look at things.
Just so that everybody knows, when you get this, all of the blue that you see here is a direct link to where you can find those particular assessments.
Yeah, so in planning and using assessments, we want to ensure that we have our learning goals or objectives in place first, and how are we going to assess those, and then start planning how we're going to bring our students up to it. And we want to make sure our assessments are aligned with the purpose we want them to be aligned with. And then we want to be able to look at it and use the data. How are we going to support our students' needs, as well as how are we going to move forward in our planning? And PLCs can be a very good support collaboration, looking at student work, even planning out assessments together. So the effects of planning, we want to use effective classroom assessment strategies to inform our teaching and learning practices. We want to make sure we're using the right evidence for the right purposes. Just our beginning to understand student work and their thinking helps us in how we plan our lessons and to support their learning. And having the deeper knowledge of our current student understandings. We all know that the students we have in front of us now are not the same as the students we'll have next year or the students we had a couple of years ago. So we have to continually look at the students in front of us and make the decisions that are going to support them with getting them to the end goal. And we want to be able to make efficient and effective use of the information from district and state level assessments. They do not serve the same purpose as the assessments we use in our classroom. So it's learning, they give us broader information and kind of checkpoints on where things are as a whole within the state. And then with educational outcome of improving student learning. So we want all of our assessments to be working together to ensure that our students are learning. And then an important part of all our planning is the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, and that's one of the state initiatives. So how can we approach our pedagogy, curriculum, and assessment to reach all students? It is grounded in the learning sciences and neuroscience. And the goal is not to change our students to meet the lessons we've planned, but to take our lessons to meet the complexity and variability of the students we have in front of us. So we want to design the learning experiences across the differences of our students rather than aim down the middle. And this is just a chart. And again, the links are there so you can see the chart to help us as we look at our lessons and how can we change our lessons or modify our lessons without changing the end goal, but how can we change them to ensure our students are getting what we want them to learn. And just another chart to help us. So as anything, we have our formative assessment, because before we begin a unit, we want to make sure where our students are at in terms of the learning goals. And we're going to use that information to then design our lessons, and we're going to assess our students along the way to make sure that we're helping them and supporting them all along rather than just waiting until the end, and the cycle just keeps going.
Okay, so I know we've gone a couple of minutes over. This is just our wrap up and question and answer timeframe. I'll give a couple, we're going to go through these. These were just brought up as we had the registration. So these were some of the questions that we got upon registration. So looking at this, I think maybe some of this might be answered already in our presentation, but as students spend more time working with performance tasks and higher order thinking, are they spending less time on their mathematical skills? I think we probably answered that during this particular session, and that's no, right? They're always working on those mathematical skills, and the balance that you have is actually really, they work on all of those skills maybe not quite in the exact same way that they do now, but then they are doing performance tasks to be able to assess whether they've gotten those skills. And then where we have somebody was looking for training on implementing more project-based or hands-on math for geometry and algebra 1 and 2. Hopefully some of the links that we gave you might be able to help you with that. I know we talked more about performance tasks rather than project-based learning, but a lot of those sites have very sort of similar tasks or things that you can do that are a little bit more project oriented. I don't know if Annie, you have anything else you wanted to say with
yes,
that?
there is a whole center on project-based learning, and I can't pull the name off of the top of my mind, but if they want to email me, I'm more than happy to look into it and find it and send them the link.
Okay. And then this last question is, I work with a student with disabilities in math, and I'm always looking for a way to support their skills so that they can be successful within the general ed curriculum. I do feel like specifically with students with disabilities, using that Achieve the Core coherence map and sort of understanding which skills are feeding into their particular skills that they might need in a specific class might be a really great tool for you to be able to use so that you can know really what some of those prerequisite skills are so that you can then help them apply that into what their current learning might be.
Right. And Heather, that person, again, can email me because that is something I can sit down with them and they can let me know about more specifically about what they're looking for, and I can help them find resources and how can we scaffold the learning to make them successful.
Great. So these are some upcoming webinars that we have. A couple of Excel webinars to be on the lookout if you are an Excel person and want to learn a little bit more about Excel. There's a couple of webinars coming up. As you are coming off of this particular webinar, a little quick 4-question survey will come up. Annie and I comb through these survey results. So please take the time to be able to fill that out. We really want to know what your feedback is. We're trying our best to provide training that is really meaningful and worth your time. So it's really helpful to get that feedback. And then this is us. So I'm Heather Jenkins for Demonstrated Success. Tammy Hilton was our moderator today. And then Annie Wallace is your DOE contact. So we'll stay on just for another minute. I know I'm kind of rushing through these last slides because I know what our time is looking like right now, but we'll stay on for another minute or so to see if there's any other questions. And other than that, we thank you very much for coming today.
Yes, thank you.
So I have one question in the Q&A of how can I find out about future webinars? All of the webinars are listed under our professional development on the Demonstrated Success website, and it's just demonstratedsuccess.com. And there's also the list of webinars that are upcoming for the data coaching webinars on the New Hampshire DOE website. You will also, if you got information about this particular webinar via MailChimp and you registered with an email that you got, those future webinars will come in MailChimps. We continue to send those out quite frequently. And yes, you'll get a link to all of this tomorrow, and a certificate will be right in that folder. The link to the survey, just so you know, is going to, it should pop up as soon as you log off of this particular webinar. Okay, that looks like about it. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll chat soon.
Thank you.
All right, take care.